Capturing time in motion is our topic today on Luminar Coffee Break. Let's see what we can accomplish in 10 minutes or less, starting now. Welcome, everyone. All right, so our topic today is time in motion. And what I want to do is I'm going to dive right in. I'll give a little presentation on what we'll be talking about today. So here we are. Let me get right to it. Time in motion. There are going to be 5 tips. Tip number 1, choose the right equipment. 2, find the perfect subject. 3, master shutter speed. That's going to be extremely important for this topic. Pay attention to lighting conditions. And then last, we're going to experiment and refine. All right? So let's break each one of those down. All right, choose the right equipment. So I've talked about the platypod many a times here on the show, but let me explain exactly what it is. So there we have our tripod off to the left. And when you're traveling, I will admit, I've learned, especially on the Iceland trip that we went on, you want to make sure you travel light. You want that tripod to be light when you're climbing up those mountains. So the tripod I hated with a passion because I didn't like it. Most portrait photographers don't use tripods. That platypod is what saved me. So what I do is I took the ball head off of the main tripod, put that onto the platypod, and then I just placed it onto a surface. If it wasn't level, that's what those spikes are for. So I leveled it off. That was my mini tripod. So keep in mind, tripods are extremely important when you're doing long exposures. You need it to be solid. If you don't have the tripod, that's where that platypod comes in because it kept everything nice and solid for me. All right. Now, the second one is we talked about finding the perfect subject. So what subjects are good? Now, this is from one of our insiders, Sandy. What are good subjects? Obviously, in a case like this, fast action. I'd love when we go to Las Vegas to sit on the strip and focus on something that's stationary. In my case, the one I had was Paris, the Paris hotels. Focus on an object that's not moving. And now the cars are going to be flying by. Well, from there, that's a perfect opportunity like this is to where you have that motion. You have something that looks solid, which was the buildings, and then you have motion coming in, those streaks of the cars. Now, a quick tip on that is I just put my hand, I wish I had a black card, but all I had was my hand, stuck that in front of my lens, had it on bulb mode. There we go. So when I clicked the button, it opened up the shutter. When I let go of it, it stopped. So what I would do is I knew there was a 10-second exposure, put my hand in front of it. When a car was about to come by, I raised my hand, started to count. 1, 2, and when the car was over, put my hand back in front of the lens again and just kept doing that up to the 10-second exposure that I calculated. And then I got the perfect streaks of the lights, and it only worked because the building or something in the scene has to be stationary. So look for subjects that'll help you with that. Waterfalls are another one that gives you that beautiful motion to where you could freeze it, and as it's coming down, instead of it looking like every water drop, it's smooth and silky. All right? Next one. Mastering the shutter speed, and that's what we were talking about here. This is from Jim Nix. Look how beautiful that looks. So instead of just photographing this beautiful scene, do slow exposure. Now, in order to get the shot, I talked to Jim about this is where a neutral density filter comes in. Because if you notice, he's photographing in the afternoon, so there's a lot of light coming into it. Well, if you have to use a slow shutter speed, that means there's going to be a lot of light coming into that camera. If you put on a neutral density filter, that's going to slow it down to where you get that motion right there in that waterfall, or in the rapid of the river coming through. So it's things like that to where you could take an image like this, and that shutter speed can take an ordinary little river like this and turn it into something that looks absolutely stunning. And I thought Jim did an amazing job on this. And then pay attention to the lighting conditions. Look at this. Again, Gary Bowen, one of our insiders. Beautiful shot here. From here, nighttime long exposure, you have to have a tripod, obviously. Without it, there's no way he's going to capture this shot. So this could be between maybe a 10, 15, we could ask him how many seconds of an exposure he did. But in this case here, lighting conditions. If he were to photograph this in New York City, there's too much light pollution. There's no way he's going to be able to see the stars, or let alone the Milky Way, because there's too much light pollution around. So pay attention to the lighting conditions around you. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and you can't see your hand in front of your face, chances are you're going to have a beautiful sky full of stars. But if you're out somewhere and there's cars driving by, there's light all over the place, there's no way you're going to be able to get a shot like this because there's too much light pollution all the way around. So again, pay attention to your lighting conditions. And most importantly, experiment and refine. Here's a shot from, actually, my managing editor, Lori Novak. Here's a shot, and I'm sure Lori was just out. She saw this spinning, thought about it, took this beautiful shot, and look at that, for all we know, that could have been going very, very, very slow. So if you use those other elements we talked about with the shutter speed, you can make really cool artistic shots like this just by experimenting. Now, it may come out perfect, it may not come out perfect, doesn't matter. That's what that delete key is for. If you don't want people to see any of your mess ups, but this is a great example of just experimenting, just to see what you can do. Now, with that being said, I knew some very, what's the word I'm looking for? Not responsible photographers. When they were getting into the whole light painting, they would set a wool, this wool, whatever, iron scrub thing on fire and have it attached to a string, and they'd whip it around. And people would take pictures. It did look cool, but you don't do that in the middle of two houses. You don't do that to where if that thing lets loose, it could cause a major fire. If you're going to experiment, make sure you experiment wisely, all right, and responsibly. So let's review the ones we just talked about. Equipment. Then we talked about finding the perfect subject. Shutter speed is key when it comes to long exposure. And then pay attention to that lighting condition. And last, experiment and just refine. So there we have it. Those are the five the 5 tips I'd recommend. The assignment now. Well, let me get back to that. And let me get out of the way. Here we go. Now that we have that set, so the assignment is this. Now that you've learned about the art of long exposure photography, it's time to put your knowledge into practice. And the sense of motion to find a location that offers interesting subject matter and experiment with long exposure techniques. Focus on capturing the passage of time and the sense of motion in your images. Share your best long exposure photography and reflect on the challenges and success you encountered during the process. Practice and experimentation are key to mastering this technique and unleashing your creativity. So there it is, right there if you want to take a quick screenshot. So that's what your assignment's going to be. All right. Now, I think it's a great assignment for us just to practice and understand shutter. In a case like this, yes, put the camera, in my suggestion, in manual mode. Figure out what you want your f-stop to be, and then experiment with that shutter. Because with that shutter, that's going to help you dictate time. So Joe Edelman brought out a good, a little positive saying about that. Use your shutter, select your shutter for purpose. What's the purpose you want your shutter speed for? Do you want to freeze time? Do you want time to look like you did with Jim Nix, where it's just flowing gradually? So choose your shutter speed with purpose. Choose your aperture with your feeling. So with that, do I want to blur the background? I want my creativity with that aperture. And then of course, ISO is going to lighten or darken your images. So think of it in that perspective. 1, you choose it for your purpose. 2 is for your creativity. And then the ISO, of course, is to decide to help you with the lighting conditions, making it brighter or making it darker. All right. So there it is. If you're here for the Skylum Insiders, please stick around for the Ask Me Anything segment. For everyone else, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next coffee break.